second and tell you, we all started our careers somehow. And I was coming out of business school and looking at going into a major industry, which I ultimately did for 11 years. But I also worked construction jobs, and I was thinking, maybe I should, fix up a couple apartment buildings. Maybe that might be interesting. So in 1975, I had $10,000 to my name, which was, that was from working those great union jobs during the summer. And I figured, well, if I buy a 2-flat, if one person moves out, there goes half the income, and you're really in trouble. So for $10,000 down, I'm going to buy the biggest thing I can find. And I did find a 16-unit apartment building in a northwest neighborhood called Albany Park. $10,000 down. But okay, this is it. Once somebody moves out, piece of cake. I'll just fill it in no time. So I closed on the acquisition with a seller, not a bank. I don't know if any of you have heard of land contracts, but it's where you pay somebody who pays somebody who pays somebody who pays the bank. And so I go to my local lender and say, okay, I don't have any money anymore because I put it down, but I need about $5,000 to buy materials, and then I'll do the labor to fix up the property. Well, do you have any stocks and bonds? No, I don't have any stocks and bonds. Well, any, cash anywhere? Well, I got $500 in my savings account. And he said, okay, fine, we'll loan you $500 and we'll put a hold on your savings. So I went to the lender of last resort, my poor old father. And I came out of business school, so I knew how to do perspectives and all that. And I wrote him up this plan of, okay, you give me $5,000 in 1975. I think I had an interest rate of 8%. I'll pay it back over 10 years. And, it was less than an arm's length transaction. He never got paid back. But I did get my $5,000. But anyway, so I closed on this 16-unit apartment building. The day after I closed, half the people move out. And I said, what in the world? Well, it turned out there was, there were some scoundrels in real estate. And this guy was actually paying people to live in these apartments to make it look like it was full so he could sell it. So now, instead of that one vacant and a 2-flat, I got 8. And it's like, okay. So there goes my after-work hours every day of the week and every weekend. And long and the short of it, got that fixed up over a couple of years, was able to refinance it and buy another and another and another. And over a period of 11 years, while working full-time in industry, I was able to build a small portfolio and after 11 years do it full-time. So where we are now is we have 150 wonderful employees in our company, most of whom are out in the field working at the properties, but we have a small corporate office. And when we started working with the Chicago Housing Authority on the redo of public housing, we also formed a nonprofit affiliate that does resident services, which is what Liz here is doing down here. She's heading that up at Riverwalk Homes. So just to give you a little history of what we've done, we talked about that in business since 75, 5,000 housing units developed, mixed use, mixed finance. So these are some of the properties. I love historic properties. I know many of you do too. So in the upper left one, that's in the neighborhood of Lawndale. It's a very challenging neighborhood. We have 10 properties there that we did rehabs. The 2 buildings in the middle, the one on top, the Bryn Mawr, the one down below the Bell Shore, those are historic properties in the neighborhood of Edgewater, off of Lakeshore Drive. The 2 over here, the round one, the crescent-shaped one, there's 2 each of those. It's by Chinatown. It's called the Hilliard Homes development. The architect is Bertram Goldberg, who did Marina Towers in the city, did River City development in the city, and also did Prentice Hospital with Northwestern University, where my 3 girls were born. And yes, you go up the middle of the round building, and the apartments are shaped like slices of pie. It's very interesting. Another historic building up north, some new construction in the old Cabrini Green neighborhood, as well as a mid-rise down there, and then some mixed use at the lower left there in the uptown community that includes a couple housing buildings and also some retail, including Target. So here's some just before and after pictures. This is the Hilliard development near Chinatown. The round building on the left, the crescent building there. These are like before pictures. You can see the condition of going into buildings that have been shut down and water infiltration. I'm sure many of you have seen that in older structures. Sort of looks like a housing project, doesn't it? So what we did is we went tip to toe, renovated everything. This is a model. We don't furnish our apartments, but this is a model. And so the round buildings have 181 one-bedrooms for seniors. The crescent-shaped buildings have 1s, 2s, and 3 bedrooms for families. Here's a development in the village of Riverdale, east of here. There was a development that was built in the mid-1960s as workforce housing for those people working in the steel mills. So the lower left picture, that's what was left that we rehabbed. So we rehabbed 90 townhomes, and then we put a couple of mixed-use structures up towards the main street, one of which has a Quick Mart in it, and then the other one has a daycare in it. This is what we started with. We didn't end up with this. We started with it. But this is again, I'm sure many of you have seen buildings that have been abused over the years and abandoned. And then, you get in there, you do your rehab, you clean it all up, and make it nice, and then obviously rent it to responsible residents. So we received a call from the Village of Joliet back in 2005. They were seeing the light at the end of the tunnel on the condemnation, and they were looking, could you come down and help us, perhaps be our development consultant, because we pretty soon we're going to have to figure out what to do with Evergreen Terrace. So, as most of you know, the purchase price determined by appraisals and blessed by the court was around $15 million. The city was acquired a property in September of 2017, and then what happened was the property went to the city and then went into a partnership between Holsten and the city. We were happy to be the development advisor for the city, but outside counsel to the city said, well, if you're going to do any redevelopment here that's going to involve federal funding or tax credits or any of these myriad of sources of money, you really need, HUD's going to be looking to an experienced developer to work with you. So we end up being a partner with the city, and the city is the controlling partner, so they're the final say on everything. We're the managing partner, and we do the day-to-day. So that's how it's set up right now. So now I'm going to have Andrea come up here, and she's going to briefly take us through the many iterations that we went through and trying to figure out what would be best for the site.
So hi everyone, I'm Andrea Keeney. I have worked for Peter for the past 17 years. I actually did the development that you saw previously, the one down in Riverdale, and will be serving as project manager on the redevelopment of Riverwalk homes. So to orient everyone with the site, these are existing conditions down at Riverwalk homes. I know a lot of you have heard us refer to it as that. It's no longer referred to as Evergreen Terrace. It is in fact now Riverwalk homes, so we've kind of rebranded the site. There are 7 existing buildings. There are 3 that are sited along the bluff, which are labeled as A, B, and C. One that's along Broadway, that's kind of outside of the project. It has residences on either side of it, but it's not enclosed within kind of the gated area. And then what is labeled E is an existing community center. We have, as Liz will talk about a little bit more, we have some after-school programs that are held there, social services, residents come in and out, job fairs, things of the sort. So she'll get into that a little bit later. And then south of the community center are 3 existing buildings as well. There's one H, which is rather large and potentially has the ability to have a daycare center in it, and or a food pantry, which Liz will talk about as well, and then 2 wood frame buildings at the south end of the site, so G and F. a total of 356 existing units. These are all studio 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. The majority of the units here are 1 and 2 bedrooms, so there's very few 3, but there is a demand for all unit types. I should mention that we are pretty much right now at full occupancy, and we have a wait list of about, what, Peter, 600 families or so. So there's definitely a demand for this type of housing. So going back to 2015, this is probably a scenario that people haven't seen for a while, but Holsten was brought in by the city, I believe, back in 2012. The condemnation suit was pretty much completed, or an acquisition amount was determined back in 2015, which was the $15 million that Peter talked about. So around the same time, council asked us to start coming up with some development scenarios. So this is one that we wanted to highlight for everyone because I think people really haven't seen this. This was one where we would keep existing buildings A, B, and C, and you'll see a rendering of that in my next slide, but doing some pretty extensive rehabilitations there, and then demolishing the balance of the site with the exception of the community center, and there would be all new construction there. Along with, at the park area, we were proposing underground parking there as well. The issue with this sort of project is the cost that it takes to get there. So there was a gap on this redevelopment scenario in somewhere in the area of $20 million. That, coupled with the fact that the city is looking for its payback of its acquisition loan of about $15 million, made this type of deal next to impossible to complete unless the city was willing to put up additional dollars, which it's not. But we did want to show people this for reference because these are the types of deals that Holsten typically does, as Peter showed before, really extensive rehabilitations. The difference here is that we have an acquisition price that we have to pay back to the city. They want to be made whole, and we understand that, but it makes doing a redevelopment all the more difficult. So just to kind of show you some renderings that were put together, these are the 3 existing buildings that are along Bluff. Our plans back in 2015 showed glass enclosure additions on the top of all of these buildings, and then, as I mentioned, everywhere else, new construction. Again, another rendering. So where are we now? The last 4 to 5 months, we've met with several community groups, and we've come up with 5 concepts that we presented to council as well. The first concept, and I think maybe some of you have been at these meetings before and know these, but we'll go through them a little just so you have background on it. So scenario 1 is 319 units. This keeps all of the existing buildings, operating them as is, and essentially paying back the city its acquisition loan. The only difference here between what's existing and what we're proposing is the demolition of the 2 buildings that were formerly at the south end of the site. So about 4 months ago, we met with council members individually on site and walked all of the buildings. Those 2 buildings are wood frame, they're in pretty bad shape. I think everyone kind of came to a conclusion that they have to be torn down at some point. So we're modeling this as 319 units, this first scenario. Again, keeping the existing families there. As I mentioned, removal of buildings F and G, which is a total of 37 units, and then demolition would be paid for through operations of those 2 buildings. The city purchase price that you see here is at $11.4 million. So at the time of acquisition, the city was holding CDBG funds, which are community development block grant funds that are administered by HUD. So they had been sitting on about $3.6 million of that money. And so at the time of acquisition, HUD approved them paying back a portion of their acquisition loan. So the outstanding balance owed to the city is $11.4 million. And capital repairs. So some of you might ask, what's going to happen with the buildings? They're in bad shape, they probably need improvements. There's a replacement reserve sitting with HUD of about $2.6 million right now. So we would tap into that money and be able to do repairs to the buildings and units on an as-needed basis. So the second scenario is similar to the first. The only difference is that the city also asked us to look at paying them back $10 million of the estimated legal fees. I do actually think that their legal fees were in excess of $10 million, but they wanted to know how quickly could they get paid back both the outstanding acquisition balance and the $10 million of legal fees, and we determined that that would take about 30 years operating the units as is. So the third scenario is one that we've advanced to council. I think this is probably one of the two that are likely to end up with. So this scenario demolishes 4 of the existing buildings, but keeps buildings A, C, and D, and the community center, which is E. The community center is in good shape. We've done some aesthetic improvements to it, so we think that it can stay. A, C, and D would all receive a moderate rehab. So people ask, what's a moderate rehab? It's essentially doing new kitchens, new baths, aesthetic improvements. And so that's what we'd be doing here. It would not be a gut. We would not be taking it down to the studs and rebuilding, reconfiguring the units. The units would stay as is, but there would be aesthetic improvements done. So keeping the same families there with studio 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. This would be done in 2 sub-phases. And the city purchase price would be paid back through both operations prior to redevelopment commencing, and then also through our capital budgets. There's a gap on this scenario, and actually the gap has gone down a little bit since we put this PowerPoint presentation together, but there's a gap of a little bit more than $2 million. That is a gap that we typically see on redevelopment projects when we're starting out. So that's not something that we're kind of shying away from. This is something that we feel that we can overcome through an additional ask of the Illinois Housing Development Authority or identifying additional soft funds. The next scenario is 144 units, the same building that were in scenario 3. The difference here is that this would be a complete gut rehab. So again, gut rehab, taking the units down to the studs, reconfiguring the existing unit layouts, making the units larger, about 20% larger. Construction costs on this type of scenario would be somewhere in the area of $200 a square foot as opposed to $75 a square foot for the mod rehab. And I just want to point out, some people might think that that seems on the high end. Our financing requires that we use both Davis-Bacon and prevailing wage. So that's why our construction costs are coming in higher. So on this scenario, again, expanding the units, reducing the number of units down to about 144, which is about a 20% increase to each one of the unit sizes. But the issue here is we have a financing gap of $10 million. So this is likely not one that we're going to be able to proceed with. And the last scenario, which is the most expensive of all, is one that I think had been discussed, excuse me, previously, probably community discussions about what potentially could happen on site. So we were asked by one of the council members to model a scenario showing the demolition of all buildings, replacing those buildings with 115 townhome style units. And so as some of you might be aware, there's a settlement agreement with the U.S. Housing and Development Organization, so HUD, and that requires a minimum of 115 units being available to the families that are currently living on site. And so we modeled this as 115 units of townhome units, similar, I believe, to the River's Edge development that's in Joliet. Again, a combination of 2 and 3 bedroom units here, and those are modeled at 1,200 and 1,500 square feet. Construction cost of $200. We carry the acquisition price of the 11.4, but also included in our capital budget is the demolition of all those buildings. So our total project costs come in at about $58 million, which leaves us with a financing gap of $24 million. There is no way that a deal like this can happen in Joliet unless there are substantial dollars that are given by the city, and I don't believe that that's going to happen, but that's obviously up to council members to decide. And the final scenario is one that was presented by 2 Joliet residents, I believe Mr. Soto and Mr. Damon. I will mispronounce his last name, but in any event, they wanted to look at, for us to look at de-densifying the site even more. So down to that minimum of 115 units that's required by the HUD settlement agreement. And so their proposal included retaining buildings B and C at the north end of the site, which actually house 128 units, not 115. But their proposal was to keep 13 of those units vacant or as storage. So this is another one that's sitting in front of council right now. This scenario and the scenario 3 that I had presented with 177 units. So there's kind of some discussions happening likely behind the scenes, and we're hoping to have a decision on this this coming Tuesday. I think I had talked a little bit about community meetings and meeting, the Joliet residents. We've had multiple meetings at the Joliet City Council. I think Peter and I have been down there every 2 weeks for the last 3 months or so. In addition to that, we did have council members that came out and toured the site. We walked through the buildings and kind of talked through these redevelopment plans one-on-one. And then we met with Kappa, who actually was nice enough to allow us to have a public meeting, the St. Pat's and St. John's neighborhood. And then most importantly, I think, very important, I should say, meetings with the residents. And I think all of you can imagine most of these residents want to see their homes retained. They want to live there. This is the best housing they can probably find. I think probably finding housing is difficult, so they really would like to stay. So that's kind of the feedback that we're getting from them. With that, I'm going to transition over to Liz, who heads our Holsten Human Capital Development Division down at Riverwalk Homes. So Liz.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. So we're going to kind of redirect here to more the humanistic view of what's going on at Riverwalk Homes. A lot of times in all these discussions, people get lost in the discussion, and we have to remember that we have 356 current units. We have approximately 758 residents. Of those 758 residents, over 400 are children. I know that District 56, Dr. Rouse, we thank you for your commitment to Riverwalk Homes and for the continuum of education for the children. When we talk about displacing individuals, we're displacing families, we're displacing their lives. Okay, so we start to have gaps in education and things like that, which is a lot of things we don't think about. When we're talking numbers, we're not thinking about how this is going to affect when a child is removed out of the school that they've been in for 3-4 years and now going someplace else. So those are things that are rarely talked about. So we focus in Holsten Human Capital Development, and Jackie Holsten, Peter's wife, is the executive director of Holsten Human Capital Development. We have this at every site. There's a program manager and a resident service coordinator, and what we basically do is provide the programming, we provide referrals, basically tend to the needs of the residents. Basically for self-sufficiency. Anything that we can do to improve the quality of life of the residents is what we do. As Peter was saying, the majority of the residents do want to retain their homes. There's not a lot left in the Joliet area for people to go. And we have, I think a lot of times people, they look at, and I did too, when the terrace was around, it kind of was like an island in the middle of Joliet. It was a mystery. Nobody really knew who was over there. And as I worked in other social service agencies, whenever I would get extra dollars, I would send it over to Evergreen. And I would go over there, and it was like they were isolated. And so, wasn't mentioned before, but I'm a 3-time breast cancer survivor. So after my 3rd time, I said, you know what, God has not kept me on this earth to chase a paycheck. Where is the most need in Joliet? And at that time, it was Evergreen, it came to mind. And I can tell you, out of all the jobs that I've had, it has been my favorite and most gratifying job. You cannot help but fall in love with the residents when you come over to now Riverwalk Terrace. Riverwalk Homes. So, like I said, and I'm not by any means a bleeding heart or liberal. I do believe in empowerment, not enabling, and that's what we do through our programming. We are very happy, and I was talking to JD prior to the meeting. We have a huge partnership with Joliet Junior College. They are now going to have on-site GED classes at Riverwalk. Along with the on-site GED classes, we will have on-site tutors. We will also have a career counselor, and they are planning to do a bridge program, and that starts September 4th. Then a bridge program, which will be starting in for the spring semester, and we have a choice. We haven't decided yet between CNA, logistics and shipping, and then also computer training. So that's huge. And then it is for them to continue their education interaction at LA Junior College. So we're very happy for that partnership. Another huge partnership, we are starting a food pantry. We have a partnership with Northern Illinois Food Bank. It is going to be a food bank for the entire, our food pantry for the entire area. Not just any program we do, it's open to the community as a whole, always has been, and then for the community center will continue to be so. This food pantry will be unique as it will be set up more like a grocery store style. So we are getting funding from Will County Community Concerns. They are funding the food that will be brought into the pantry. There will be social service agencies on site to assist with teaching people about budgeting, even though the food at the food pantry is free. But we do want people to learn about budgeting. We want them to learn about nutrition. We will have dietitians on site speaking with the individuals coming through. We have an organic garden currently that's funded through Will County Land Use, and that food will be also incorporated. Our whole focus, once again, is to get people healthy. Okay, so by doing this, we're hoping that the dietitian is there coaxing them, because as you go through, somebody will be, and we're going to have a demonstration kitchen. I'm looking at Bill over there, and I'm thinking about Bill. Then maybe you can come down and help them. I'm eyeing people in the room, because one of the things that we really try to focus on is building partnerships in the community. So by all means, anyone who has an idea, because I don't think, and I could be wrong, but anybody in this room, you know what I mean? If any of us can say that we made it on our own, you know, we've always needed help, you know what I mean, to get where we're going, whether it was our parents, whether it was our neighbors, our teachers. There's always been someone there to motivate us, someone there to help us, someone, you know, just when we think we can't do something, you know, we need that encouragement. And that's basically what we have at Riverwalk Homes. Our population is very young. We have very few seniors. The majority of our residents are 35 years old and younger. So we're talking a very young population with very young children. We have very few teenagers, maybe 40 teenagers, but so we have, like I said, very young children, very young mothers. So there's an opportunity for people to come in to mentor, for people to come in with programming, you know, that to give the cultural capital that maybe we might have been able to receive when we were growing up, and we had something to fall back on. A lot of the individuals there don't have that to fall back on. So when you know, and I can even speak, like I said, when I was going through cancer, if it wasn't for people in the community, you know what I mean, helping me, or, you know, giving me a job when I came back to work, you know what I mean, because you're a little bit nervous, you know, it's just like, you know, well, nobody's gonna want me, I'm damaged. And I think we have kind of done that to the residents at Riverwalk. We have kind of put a label on them. The majority of the residents at Riverwalk do work. You know what I mean? So basically, everybody has the opinion that, oh, people are living there for free, they don't do anything. No. We had a young lady there that she received the Golden Apple Scholar Award. She graduated, she's now going on for her master's. We have another young lady that came there. Both of these young ladies came homeless, and then they came there. She's going on to get her doctorate. Okay, there's multiple success stories. We have a lot of diamonds in the rough, but when you talk about the volume of people there, we need other people to step in and assist us. There's two of us that are working with the residents. We need everyone to kind of jump in and help us. I don't want to forget other programs that we have. We have junior achievement to teach financial literacy to youth. We figured the sooner we start teaching that, the better. We do have after-school programming. We have one-on-one tutoring. We have team programs. We have women empowerment programs. Our back-to-school fair, we gave over 300 book bags out, over 50-some haircuts for the youth. There was a lot of vendors, over 20 vendors there. The Black Police Officers Association was there every year. They do the cookout. Sheriff Fest comes in, they provide the food, the clothing, and then multiple other agencies were there. So basically, just wanting to, you know, if you've never been to Riverwalk, I would encourage you to come over and meet the people. And once again, all I can say is we would love to partner with you, and any ideas you have, or just want to come over and mentor. We do have a few individuals from Kappa that have volunteered to come over and tutor in the after-school program. So we do take in volunteers. Okay, thank you.
a holistic approach to our properties, and we're delighted to have the opportunity to work with the residents of Riverwalk. Next Tuesday night at council, we're hoping that there will be a decision made on you know, which way we go in the future. If it entails going out and getting funding from the State Housing Authority, IDA, or other sources, that will take a while. So we'll probably have Riverwalk as it is for at least another 1 to 2 years before financing comes in. So that's why what Liz does and the others is so important, because we have a lot of residents there that can use help. Long term, you know, I think you've seen and heard that there's a strong interest in de-densifying the site, which sounds like it's going to happen. That will entail a substantial relocation of residents in Joliet or Will County, wherever you know, we can assist them with their relocation needs. So our goal, our short-term goal is to keep up the property as best we can with the resources we have. And then obviously the long-term goal is what the community wants, and hopefully we'll hear about that next Tuesday. So that's our presentation.